Shabbat Shalom. I'm going to share with you something quickly I was thinking about last night that I haven't thought about in a long time. I don't think I ever told you the story of why I became a rabbi. I'm not going to do it today, don't worry. But there's a Genesis story which begins when I'm 18 years old, and I was looking for a job in Mexico City. A friend of mine was working for the biggest Syrian Jewish day school in Mexico, and he worked in the audiovisual department. And I was studying journalism and communication, so he said to me, look, I'm leaving, and they're looking for somebody to take my place in the audiovisual department. Would you like to take my place? I said, of course, how much does it pay? So let's imagine he said $10 an hour. So I said, I'm in. So I went and I had an interview with the principal of the school. Now, this school had about 1,000 students, and the principal in those days was an Israeli educator who actually had been working for the Jewish agency and decided to stay in Mexico. So when that happens, the Jewish agency cuts all ties with a Jewish institution that actually retains the shaliach that stayed, that didn't go back to Israel. So they were not able to hire Israeli teachers for a long time in that school. So I go and I sit with him and I interview, really nice guy, by the way. And he says to me, I see here you're going to work at the audiovisual department. And I say, yeah. He says, tell me a little bit about yourself. So I tell him my whole life story. And he says, look, I think I would love for you to be our high school Jewish history teacher. I started laughing literally and I said, what? Yeah, look, you just came back from Israel. You were a year in Israel. You studied in the Institute for Young Leaders from Abroad. Why can't you teach Jewish history? I said, look, I don't think I'm really qualified to teach Jewish history. So he says to me, well, let me tell you, it pays, instead of $10 an hour, about $50 an hour. So I said, okay, I'll do it. Now, I went home, and I told my father. He said, good for you. What are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to have to read a lot. And then I went to see Liz, and I said, Liz, what am I going to do? And Liz says, you're going to have to really study. So I became immersed in Jewish history, and I was teaching 16-year-olds, and I was 18. It was really a prescription for disaster all through and through. But miraculously, it went really well. Not only did it go well, but many of those students that I taught are still my friends on Facebook. Imagine that. And also, that is what got me the position of youth director at the synagogue. That's how they found out about me, and that's what actually eventually led me to rabbinical school. So I'll tell you that story when I retire. I don't have to burden you right now. But the point of the story is that sometimes in life, you have to do things because you have to do them. You can't pass up on an opportunity because you're afraid. And sometimes there's a very thin line that divides stupidity from faith. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to distinguish. Because if that would have gone wrong, I probably wouldn't have been standing here today. But it didn't go wrong. It went super right. And I am here. And that's, I think, the ultimate lesson from Parashat Lech Lecha. Vayomer Adonai el Abram, Lech Lecha, me'artzecha, u'mimolatecha, u'mibet abicha, el haaretz asher areka. Get yourself out, Abram, says God, to the land that I will show you. By the way, notice that the first word of the spiritual journey of the Jewish people does not begin with pray or have faith or believe in me. It says, go. This, by the way, begins to tell us what a defining trait of the Jewish tradition is to actually act, to do things. It's more important to do things than to pray for them. You can pray all you want, but ultimately you have to walk the walk. And that's what really differentiates people from giants. That's how Abraham becomes a giant. He just goes. And by the way, people always make fun of Abraham, right? Oh, he heard voices. He wore aluminum foil on his head. Look, he was a little schizophrenic probably. But his faith was unquestionable. Beyond his faith, his ability to act without fear was incredible. And that's something that we can learn a lot from. You know, Rashi, when he tries to unravel the command of Lech Lecha, right? It's a command. It's not a request. What does Rashi say? Lech Lecha, leanotecha, letovatecha. He says, what God is saying, you're going to go, but it's going to be for your benefit and for your future. So in other words, Abraham is not doing this for God. He's not doing God any favors. He's doing it for himself, for his family, to better his life eventually, because where he was in Haran, there was nothing for him. Every major Jewish story begins with a Lech Lecha moment. And by the way, for those of us who think that Abraham's story is merely a story about spirituality the way it is defined in modernity, meaning we hold hands and we sing Kumbaya, that's not the case. Abraham was a warrior. He rescues Lot. He goes to war against the king of Sodom and Gomorrah. He basically puts his life where his mouth is. And he understands that to grow spiritually, sometimes you have to do things that you were not equipped to do. No one ever sees him or herself as doing the things that we once did in our lives to become who we are. If you think about it, we leave Egypt. There's no Torah. We have no idea what's going to happen. By the way, I just want to make a disclaimer. If you ask Rashi, he will tell you, we knew there was going to be a Torah because Ein Mukhar Mukdam Batorah, there's no early or late in the Torah. It's a circular text. But for us that are not Rashi, who follow the Torah linearly, we leave Egypt without knowing what's going to happen. Abraham leaves his home based on promises, things he could not see. I'm going to show you a land. Yeah, sure. I'm going to make you great. Of course. But he goes. Ruth, for example, if you ever look at the book of Ruth, and one of the reasons, by the way, why we use the book of Ruth as an inspiration, as an example of those who choose Judaism, is because Ruth is a visionary just like Abraham. It's not the line where she says, your people will be my people, that defines her, if you ask me. It is the fact that she moves out of Moab without knowing what's going to happen, that she's going to meet Boaz, and she's going to become the great-grandmother of King David. That was not in the cards. But she goes. And if you look at the lives of Jews by choice, and so many of them have made Judaism so great, they never know what that journey is going to do for them. Ramban notes something amazing. The geography of Abraham's journey is what is special. More so than actually arriving to the land is the places where he stops. In other words, the journey is as important as the destination, because it is that journey that defines him and makes him who he is. It is that journey that makes him capable of arguing with God. It is that journey that makes him capable of binding his son, whether we like it or not. It is that journey that makes him do things that some of us wouldn't even dare to think about. Let me tell you, I want to share with you 3 stories. The first one of them you, I think, know very well. In 2003, the Columbia space shuttle exploded. And in the space shuttle, there was an Israeli astronaut, Ilan Ramon. Now, many of you here, I see, you probably don't remember 2003 very well. But I do. And it was a Shabbat morning. And the pieces of the shuttle were scattered all over Texas. Many years later, I walked into the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, and there was an exhibit called Reaching Out to Heaven. And it was basically 5 or 6 fragments they were able to rescue from Texas, from the debris that belonged to Ilan Ramon. And they were on display. One of those fragments was a little tiny piece of a Torah scroll that he actually chose to take with him to space. And the reason why he chose to take that Torah scroll to space was because that Torah had been in Bergen-Belsen, and his parents were Holocaust survivors. And he wanted to show not only the world but himself that we as Jews begin journeys that sometimes seem cursed, but we never know where they're going to lead us. And so, here was this Jewish astronaut in space, observing Shabbat in space. He was not Shomer Shabbos, but he did it because he thought he was a representative of the entire Jewish people in space. And you know, after his death, his wife, Rona, founded the Ramon Foundation, where she actually collects money and funds to help Israelis to explore and create. And we know how that story goes. Innovation Nation. Lech Lecha is an incredible command because it implies that you're able to take the first step without being paralyzed. Let me tell you how hard it is to take the first step. Do you remember Nathan Sharansky? Nathan Sharansky, who in his former life was known as Anatoly Sharansky, was one of the prisoners of Zion in the Soviet Union. And again, many of you are too young to remember this. But when I was in Israel for the first time in my life in 1986, Sharansky arrived in Israel. It was one of the most incredible moments I could ever describe to you. But more than that moment is how he got there. Sharansky was kept in isolation for 9 years by the Soviets. Why? Because he realized that he didn't want to live lie anymore. He wanted to be who he was. He wanted to observe Judaism. He wanted to be part of our people. So they put him in isolation. And when finally his release was negotiated in a prisoner exchange, he walked across a bridge in Europe. And do you remember that crossing of that bridge? He did not walk in a straight line. He went in a zigzag. And when he got to Israel, they asked him, Natan, why did you walk in a zigzag? He said, I didn't want my captors to define my journey to freedom and to tell me where to walk. If this doesn't give you chills, I don't know what does. And this is a Lech Lecha moment. Lech Lecha doesn't end with the words written in the Torah. Lech Lecha continues, Leolam Vaed. It continues forever. It is not about Abraham. It is about an entire people. It's an entire journey that spans centuries and generations and worlds. Between 1938 and 1940, and this I found out later in my life, 17,000 people, mainly from Austria and Germany, fled to Shanghai, China. Why did they go to Shanghai? Because it was one of the only places in the world that didn't require a visa. And when they got there, now imagine, right? It was not just normal Yidden. It was not people from Poland. These were Yekes. These were like stubborn, full of themselves German Jews. And I say that with trepidation, right? But these are the guys that refused to speak Yiddish. These are the people that were preaching in German in the synagogues before anybody else did, because they were cultured. These were the people whose world fell apart, even more so than anybody else's, because they never saw it coming. They find themselves in Shanghai, and they build a community without speaking the language. It's not from German to French or to English, right? It's from German to Chinese. They build a community. They amass tremendous wealth. They really make a name for themselves. And if you go to Shanghai today, you can still see some of those synagogues. Unfortunately, when the communists came in, everything was destroyed. But for their fortune, they were able to leave, and many of them, by the way, there were people in our community in Las Vegas who used to live in Shanghai during the war. Every single one of us has a Lech Lecha moment. If you think about it carefully, every single one of us had to make a change he or she did not choose to make. We all had to accept a role we felt unprepared for. And I'm talking about more than just being a Jewish history teacher, right? And all of us had to imagine at some point a future with shape we could not understand. And to know that we live in our own future is actually quite powerful. But to do that, you have to trust to take the first step. You know, it is important for us to not live with fear. If there's an ultimate lesson that we learn from Abraham, is that fear really paralyzes us. And we can accuse Abraham of everything we want to accuse him, right? By the way, one of the reasons why he's such a giant is not that he was a superhero, he was a human being. And thus we can find inspiration in his human traits, in his faults, in his glory, in his accomplishments, and in his failures. He had many failures too, just like we do. But the truth is that in order to move forward, you're going to have to risk failure. No one ever moves forward without having failed previously in his or her life. So I wish for all of us, dear friends, that we all keep on experiencing Lech Lecha moments. Even at the age of 119, may we keep experiencing Lech Lecha moments. You never know where they arrive, and you never know where they will lead you. But the truth is that if you follow not only your heart, but your intuition, without fear, if you stand up to the giants in front of you without fear, you will actually accomplish incredible things in life, just like Abraham. He's a giant not because he was 10 feet tall. He's a giant because his heart and his soul were just like ours. Shabbat Shalom. Jean, was that okay? Jean, over. Was that okay? Okay. We're going to continue on page 184 with the Chatzi Kaddish for Musaf. Let us please rise. And that's what means. Look at you. Should I tell your story? Yeah. Okay. I was about to tell DJ's Lech Lecha story. He told me not to do it. So I'm respecting his privacy.